There is a moment in human development when possibility is no longer enough. You may know that something different is possible. You may feel the pull towards change. You may even have taken the first uncertain step. But eventually life asks a different question. Not what could I become, but what am I going to do with what I have? This is the territory of the magician. The fool steps into experience. The magician helps you discover that you can influence it. The fool says, I'm willing to begin. The magician says, now I will fully engage and participate. And that movement from possibility into personal agency is one of the most important developmental transitions in the whole Major Arcana. Because the magician represents the emergence of intentional consciousness, the discovery of voice, choice, focused attention, communication that influences, and the extraordinary realization that we're not passive recipients of life, we are participants in it. Welcome back to Tarot Major Arcana. This is the second video in our sequential journey through all 22 Major Arcana as archetypal pathways of personal, emotional, and spiritual development. In the previous video, we explored the Fool as the archetype of beginning, innocence, openness, and movement before certainty. The Fool crosses the threshold, but a journey cannot remain pure possibility forever. Eventually, possibility has to encounter will. And this is where we meet card 1, the Magician. Within the framework we're using throughout this series, the Magician represents agency, directed will, expression, influence, and focused intention. In its healthy form, we see clarity, agency, and congruent communication. When blocked, we see weak voice, self-doubt, and diminished agency. And in shadow, the same power can distort into manipulation, image management, and verbal control. And that healthy blocked and shadow distinctions are particularly important within the magician, because power itself is neither good nor bad. The deeper question is how consciously, congruently, and ethically are we using it? To understand the magician properly, we first need to understand what has changed since the Fool. The Fool represents potential, open possibility, the willingness to enter life without knowing everything in advance. But the Fool has not yet developed much conscious direction. The magician changes that. The magician begins to differentiate. This is the emergence of agency, and from a development perspective, that's enormous. Because there's a profound difference between believing life simply happens around you and recognizing that your choices, actions, language, attention, and intention actively participate in the reality you're creating. The wider framework of my book, The Tarot Major Arcana, describes the archetypes and their movements through which consciousness develops. If you're interested in understanding it in more detail, the transformational aspects of each of the 22 archetypes and their healthy, blocked, and shadow energies, I explain exactly how to recognize them, what they mean, and the positive, insightful power you can access through them. The book is available on Amazon. I'll put a link to it in the description below this video. This early transition point from innocence into directed will is a fundamental part of our whole developmental journey. The magician is where potential begins to become directed action. The magician is numbered 1, and again, symbolically, that makes enormous sense. If 0 represents undifferentiated possibility, 1 introduces a center point. Something has become distinct. There is now an organizing consciousness capable of saying, I. Not necessarily ego in its distorted sense, but identity enough to direct energy. 1 establishes direction, focus, singularity, and intent. The Fool may see 10 possible roads and delight in all of them. The magician begins to choose 1. Now, that doesn't mean that the other possibilities disappear. It means consciousness begins to organize itself around intention. And without this capacity, very little can become manifest in human life. Because eventually we must decide, where will I place my attention? What will I communicate? What will I practice? What will I commit energy towards? What will I create? This is the magician's territory. The magician is positioned on the tree of life on the upper path between Kether, the crown, and Bina, understanding. Consciousness has not yet descended fully into the complexity of embodied human experience, but something important has happened. Pure potential is beginning to become understood and directed. The book uses the tree of life primarily as a map of consciousness and development, with each major arcana path representing a developmental movement between distinct states, which is a useful way to think about the magician here. It's not simply a mystical figure demonstrating supernatural powers. It represents the movement whereby possibility begins to acquire intention, organization, and expression. An idea becomes communicated. The potential becomes something we can work with. The invisible begins its journey towards form. Traditionally, the magician stands between above and below. One hand reaches upward, the other directs downward. And this is one of the most recognizable symbolic gestures in the tarot. At one level, it suggests the movement of beginning something from possibility into expression, the idea into language, and an intention into behavior, an inner image into outer action. The magician also has access to the symbolic tools associated with the different domains of human functioning. And whether we interpret these spiritually, psychologically, or practically, the message is similar. Resources are available. The developmental question is whether we recognize them and know how to use them. This is one of the reasons the magician is so relevant in personal development. People frequently say, I don't have what I need. Sometimes that is objectively true, but often a deeper investigation reveals something different. They may possess knowledge they don't trust, a voice they don't use, skills they undervalue, relationships they've not called upon, choices they've not made, and responsibilities they blame on other people. The magician asks what is already available that you're failing to use consciously. At its healthiest, the magician is an archetype of congruent agency. The word congruent very much matters here, because healthy agency doesn't mean forcing reality to obey us. It means that intention, language, and behavior begin to line up. You say something matters, and your behavior reflects that it actually does matter. You identify a direction and begin taking actions that support it. You recognize your capacity to influence without pretending that you control everything. This framework describes healthy magician energy as clarity, agency, and congruent communication. Think about what that looks like in everyday life. A person decides they need a different career and they begin acquiring new skills. Someone recognizes that a relationship needs a difficult conversation and they actually have it. A creator stops endlessly refining an idea and produces something. A leader communicates a clear direction. Someone who has spent years saying, I couldn't possibly do that, begins to ask, what would I need to learn or do to ensure that I will do it? That linguistic change alone is profoundly magician-like, because agency often begins in language. And I think this is one of the most important aspects of the magician. Human beings don't simply use language to describe experience. Language also helps organize experience. Consider the difference between I have no choice and I don't like the choices available to me. Those statements may appear similar, yet psychologically they're worlds apart. The first removes agency, the second acknowledges agency while recognizing difficulty. The magician reminds us that language can close possibility or expand and organize it. It can conceal responsibility or reveal it. It can diminish choice or recover it. So what happens when this archetypal function is blocked? The blocked magician often appears as diminished agency. The person experiences themselves primarily as the effect of circumstances. Life happens, others decide, opportunities disappear, and they may become increasingly disconnected from the ways they still participate in their own experiences. This may appear as a weak voice, low agency, or self-doubt, as blocked expression of the magician. This sounds like, I don't know what to say. I'm not that sort of person. I wouldn't know where to start. There's nothing I can do. And sometimes there genuinely are circumstances outside of our control. An archetypal framework should never become a simplistic claim that people can control everything that happens to them. We cannot. But there is an equally dangerous distortion at the other extreme, the belief that because we can't control everything, we have no influence over anything. The block magician loses sight of the difference between control and agency. We may not control the situation, but we can still influence our responses to it through our language, our boundaries, our interpretations, our decisions, and ultimately our behaviors. The question becomes, where have I handed away power that actually belongs to me? The magician has another distortion, and this one moves in the opposite direction. Instead of believing I have no influence, the shadow magician may become preoccupied with controlling influence. Here we find manipulation, performance, image management, and linguistic control. Charm can be used strategically to conceal intention. Words used not to communicate, but to engineer perception. Understanding the shadow expression matters because influence itself is not inherently manipulative. We influence people every day. A teacher, a parent, a coach, a leader, or a friend influences. Anyone who communicates influences. The ethical issue lies in how. Does communication clarify or obscure? Does it respect choice or exploit vulnerability? Does it invite understanding or engineer dependency? Does it reveal intention or disguise it? The mature magician uses communication to create connection, clarity, and possibility. The shadow magician uses it to control the frame while concealing the hand doing the controlling. There is another particularly modern form of shadow magician energy, and that's image management. We live in a world where people can curate their identity constantly. Social media makes this obvious, but the pattern is much older. We manage what others see. We might present competence while hiding insecurity. We may project spiritual certainty while avoiding unresolved pain. We may appear confident while desperately needing approval. People perform success, happiness, belonging, and authority. They sometimes become so skilled at managing the external image that they lose contact with reality itself. This is where magician power becomes divided against itself. The outer message says one thing, the inner state says another. And eventually, that incongruency carries a cost. Healthy magician energy brings the two closer together. All that you are and all that you do begins to align. This gives us one of the central developmental distinctions of the magician: influence versus manipulation. Influence recognizes the other person's agency, manipulation attempts to bypass it. Influence communicates, manipulation conceals. Influence can be powerful and persuasive, but it doesn't require dishonesty about purpose. The difference is particularly useful in relationships. Imagine when someone says, I'm fine, while behaving in a way specifically designed to make the partner ask, what's wrong? This is communication, but indirect communication. A healthier magician might say, something has upset me and I'd like to talk about it. Same need, completely different relationship with agency. This makes the magician enormously important relationally. Healthy relationships require agency. You need enough sense of self to say yes or no, or that you want this and you definitely don't want that. Without that capacity, relationships become full of mind reading, hints, tests, withdrawals, resentment, and emotional maneuvering. The block magician doesn't say what they need. The shadow magician attempts to get the need met indirectly. The integrated magician develops the capacity to communicate with greater clarity and responsibility. And notice how developmental that is. The point is not simply to become more persuasive, it's to become more congruent. We also see the magician constantly in professional life. Leadership depends upon an ability to translate intention into communication. A leader may have a brilliant strategy, but if nobody understands it, little will happen. A coach may recognize a client's pattern, but must find language that enables the client to recognize it for themselves. The magician is the bridge between internal possibility and external expression. And this is why agency is not simply personal confidence. It's the capacity to make something happen through purposeful engagement. This is an important lesson here from a personal development perspective. Insight is not the same as transformation. You can know why you behave a certain way, understand your childhood, identify the pattern, recognize the archetype, perhaps even explain it beautifully, and still continue doing exactly the same thing. At some point, awareness must become agency. Something has to be done differently. This is where the magician becomes the first real archetype of intentional positive change. The fool enters the journey, the magician begins participating consciously and effectively in that journey. The magician is also frequently associated with manifestation. And I think this deserves a little care because the idea can easily become distorted into the belief that thinking intensely enough somehow removes the need for effective, prudent action. But psychologically, the magician suggests something much more substantial. Focused intention matters because it organizes attention. Attention influences perception. Perception influences choice. Choice influences behavior, and behavior influences your outcomes. So conscious creation is not simply wishing, it's alignment. An idea becomes meaningful when we begin structuring life around it. If you say that you want a healthier relationship, but continually avoid honest conversations, then intention and behavior are divided. If you say you want a new career, but take no action towards developing it, then possibility remains just possibility. If you say you value yourself, but routinely abandon your boundaries, the stated belief has not yet become embodied. The magician asks, what are you actually doing with the intention you claim to hold? So how might you recognize that the magician is particularly active for you right now? Perhaps life is asking you to stop waiting, to speak, to decide, to initiate, to organize, or to make use of something you already possess. Perhaps you have spent long enough wondering whether something is possible, and the real question now is whether you'll participate in making it possible. You may notice themes around communication, confidence, personal power, visibility, influence, and intentional action. Or perhaps you repeatedly encounter people who seem extraordinarily powerful, articulate, and persuasive. That too may be worthy of exploring, because sometimes we project an archetypal capacity onto others before recognizing our own relationship with it. The question becomes, what do they appear able to do that you've not yet permitted yourself to do? So if you want to work with the magician as a developmental archetype rather than simply memorizing its tarot meaning, here are some questions I would invite you to consider. Where in your life are you giving away agency? What resources do you already possess that you're not using? Where are you waiting to feel more confident before acting? What conversations are you avoiding? What do you need to communicate more clearly? Where do your words and behavior fail to match? What outcome are you trying to control rather than influence? And perhaps most revealingly of all, how do you use language when you feel unsafe? Because the way we communicate under pressure often reveals whether magician energy is integrated, blocked, or shadowed. Also realize that magician is not the whole story. There's a danger in believing that everything in life can be solved through more intention, more action, more influence, more will. This is not the case because some truths can't be forced. Some answers don't emerge through doing. They emerge through listening, receiving, silence, and intuition, which is why our next archetype is so important. After the magician discovers I can act upon the world, the High Priestess introduced an almost opposite wisdom. I can become quiet enough to receive what I don't yet consciously know. The magician directs, the High Priestess receives. The magician speaks, the High Priestess listens. The magician brings intention into expression. The High Priestess turns toward what lies beneath conscious intention. This sequence matters because psychological maturity requires both. So the magician is far more than the familiar image of someone performing magic. The magician represents the emergence of conscious agency, the moment possibility becomes intention, the moment intention begins to organize action. the moment we recognize that our language, attention, choices, and behavior participate in shaping the life we're experiencing. At its healthiest, the magician gives us clarity, focused intention, congruent communication, and the willingness to use our resources consciously. Blocked, it becomes self-doubt, weak voice, and the surrender of personal agency. And in shadow, it becomes manipulation, performance, image management, and the attempt to control other people's perceptions. The developmental invitation of the magician is therefore not simply to become more powerful. It's something much more mature. It's becoming conscious of the power you already exercise and learning to use it congruently. Because whether you recognize it or not, we're already influencing our lives. Through the words we repeat, the meanings we create, the choices we make, the boundaries we communicate, the actions we take, and the actions we avoid taking. The question is whether the influence is conscious. So I'll leave you with this. Where in your life is it time to stop waiting for something to happen and recognize your own capacity to participate in making it happen? And I'll also ask that if you're enjoying this deeper exploration of the Major Arcana, then please do subscribe to the channel, because we'll be working through all 22 archetypes sequentially as pathways of personal, emotional, and spiritual development. And if you'd like to explore this complete system in considerably greater depth, my book, The Tarot Major Arcana, 22 Archetypal Pathways to Inner Transformation, explores the full journey through the cards, including their developmental, psychological, shadow, and tree of life dimensions. You'll find a link in the description below this video. In the next episode, we'll move into the High Priestess, where the outward directed power of the magician encounters its necessary counterpart: silence, receptivity, intuition, and the deeper intelligence that can only be discovered when we stop trying to control the answer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.